Magician by Raymond E. Feist. This book is dedicated to the memory of my father, Felix E. Feist, in all ways a magician. Acknowledgements. Many people have provided me with incalculable aid in bringing this novel into existence. I would like to offer my heartfelt thanks to the Friday Nighters, April and Stephen Abrams, Steve Barrett, David Bryn, Anita and John Everson, Dave Guinasso, Conan Lamotte, Tim Lascelles, Ethan Munson, Bob Potter, Rich Sparl, Alan Springer, and Laurie and Jeff Felton for their useful criticism, enthusiasm, support, belief, wise counsel, wonderful ideas, and, most of all, their friendship. Billy and Russ Blake and Lillian and Mike Fessier for always being willing to help. Harold Matson, my agent, for taking a chance on me. Adrian Zackheim, my editor, for asking rather than demanding, and for working so hard to build a good book. Kate Cronin, assistant to the editor, for having a sense of humour, and for so gracefully putting up with all my nonsense. Elaine Chubb, copy editor, for having such a gentle touch, and for caring so much about the words. And Barbara A. Feist, my mother, for all of the above and more. Raymond E. Feist, San Diego, California, July 1982. Acknowledgement to the Revised Edition. On this occasion, the publication of the author's preferred edition, I would like to add the following names to the preceding list. People who, though not known to me at the time I made the foregoing acknowledgement, proved invaluable aid to me in bringing Magician to the public and contributed materially to my success. Mary Ellen Curley, who took over from Katie and kept us all on course. Peter Schneider, whose enthusiasm for the work gave me a valued ally within Doubleday and a close friend for the last decade. Lou Aronica, who bought it even when he didn't really want to do reprints, and for giving me the chance to return to my first work and rewrite it one more time. Pat Labruto, who helped before it was his job, and who took over at a tough time, and whose friendship endures beyond our business relationship. Jana Silverstein, who, despite her short tenure as my editor, has shown an uncanny knack for knowing when to leave me alone and when to stay in touch. Nick Austin, John Booth, Jonathan Lloyd, Malcolm Edwards, and everyone at Granada, now HarperCollins Books, who made the work an international bestseller. Abner Stein, my British agent, who sold it to Nick in the first place. Janny Wirtz, for being my friend, and who, by working with me on the Empire trilogy, gave me a completely different perspective on the Surani. She helped turn the game of the Council from a vague concept to a murderously real arena of human conflict. Kellerwan and Suranwani are as much her inventions as mine. I drew the outlines and she coloured in the details. And Jonathan Matson, who received the torch from a great man's hand and continued without faltering for wise counsel and friendship. The acorn fell very close to the tree. And most of all my wife, Kathleen S. Starbuck, who understands my pain and joy in this craft because she toils in the same vineyard, and who is always there, even when I don't deserve to have her there, and who makes things make sense through her love. Raymond E. Feist, San Diego, California, April 1991. Forward to the Revised Edition. It is with some hesitation and a great deal of trepidation that an author approaches the task of revising an earlier edition of fiction. This is especially true if the book was his first effort, judged successful by most standards, and continuously in print for a decade. Magician was all this and more. In late 1977, I decided to try my hand at writing part-time while I was an employee of the University of California, San Diego. It's now some 15 years later, and I've been a full-time writer for the last 14 years, successful in this craft beyond my wildest dreams. Magician, the first novel in what became known as the Rift War saga, was a book that quickly took on a life of its own. I hesitate to admit this publicly, but the truth is that part of the success of the book was my ignorance of what makes a commercially successful novel. My willingness to plunge blindly forward into a tale spanning 2 dissimilar worlds, covering 12 years in the lives of several major and dozens of minor characters, breaking numerous rules of plotting along the way, seemed to find kindred souls among readers the world over. After a decade in print, my best judgment is that the appeal of the book is based upon its being what was once known as a ripping yarn. I had little ambition beyond spinning a good story, one that satisfied my sense of wonder, adventure, and whimsy. It turned out that several million readers, many of whom read translations in languages I can't even begin to comprehend, found it one that satisfied their tastes for such a yarn as well. But insofar as it was a first effort, some pressures of the marketplace did manifest themselves during the creation of the final book. Magician is by anyone's measure a large book. When the penultimate manuscript version sat upon my editor's desk, I was informed that some 50,000 words would have to be cut. And cut I did, mostly line by line, but a few scenes were either truncated or excised. While I could live out my life with the original manuscript as published being the only edition ever read, I've always felt that some of the material cut added a certain resonance, a counterpoint, if you will, to key elements of the tale. The relationships between characters, the additional details of an alien world, the minor moments of reflection and mirth that act to balance the more frenetic activity of conflict and adventure. All these things were close, but not quite what I had in mind. In any event, to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the original publication of Magician, I have been permitted to return to this work, to reconstruct and change, to add and cut as I see fit, to bring forth what is known in publishing as the author's preferred edition of the work. So, with the old admonition, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it," ringing in my ears, I returned to the first work I undertook, back when I had no pretensions of craft, no stature as a best-selling author, and basically no idea of what I was doing. My desire is to restore some of those excised bits, some of the minor detail that I felt added to the heft of the narrative, as well as the weight of the book. Other material was more directly related to the books that follow, setting some of the background for the mythic underpinning of the Rift War. The slightly lengthy discussions of lore between Tully and Kulgan in Chapter 3, as well as some of the things revealed to Pug on the Tower of Testing, were clearly in this area. My editor wasn't sold on the idea of a sequel then, so some of this was cut. Returning it may be self-indulgent, but as this was material I felt belonged in the original book, it has been restored. To those readers who have already discovered Magician, who wonder if it's in their interests to purchase this edition, I would like to reassure them that nothing profound has been changed. No characters previously dead are now alive, no battles lost are now won, and 2 boys still find the same destiny. I ask you to feel no compulsion to read this new volume, for your memory of the original work is as valid, perhaps more so, than mine. But, if you wish to return to the world of Pug and Thomas, to rediscover old friends and forgotten adventure, then consider this edition your opportunity to see a bit more than the last time. And to the new reader, welcome. I trust you'll find this work to your satisfaction. It is with profound gratitude I wish to thank you all, new readers and old acquaintances, for without your support and encouragement, 10 years of ripping yarns could not have been possible. If I have the opportunity to provide you with a small part of the pleasure I feel in being able to share my fanciful adventures with you, we are equally rewarded. For by your embracing my works, you have allowed me to fashion more. Without you, there would have been no Silverthorn, A Darkness at Sthethenon, Fairy Tale, and no Empire trilogy. The letters get read, if not answered, even if they sometimes take months to reach me. And the kind remarks in passing at public appearances have enriched me beyond measure. But most of all, you gave me the freedom to practice a craft that was begun to see if I could do it while working at the residence halls of John Muir College at UCSD. So thank you. I guess I did it. And with this work, I hope you'll agree that this time I did it a little more elegantly, with a little more colour, weight and resonance. Raymond E. Feist, San Diego, California, August 1991. Magician. Book 1. Pug and Thomas. A boy's will is the wind's will, and the thoughts of youth are long, long thoughts. Longfellow, My Lost Youth. Chapter 1. Storm. The storm had broken. Pug danced along the edge of the rocks, his feet finding scant purchase as he made his way among the tide pools. His dark eyes darted about as he peered into each pool under the cliff face, seeking the spiny creatures driven into the shallows by the recently passed storm. His boyish muscles bunched under his light shirt as he shifted the sack of sand crawlers, rock claws, and crabs plucked from this water garden. The afternoon sun sent sparkles through the sea spray swirling around him as the west wind blew his sun-streaked brown hair about. Pug set his sack down, checked to make sure it was securely tied, then squatted on a clear patch of sand. The sack was not quite full, but Pug relished the extra hour or so that he could relax. Megar, the cook, wouldn't trouble him about the time as long as the sack was almost full. Resting with his back against a large rock, Pug was soon dozing in the sun's warmth. A cool, wet spray woke him hours later. He opened his eyes with a start, knowing he had stayed much too long. Westward, over the sea, dark thunderheads were forming above the black outline of the Six Sisters, the small islands on the horizon. The roiling, surging clouds, with rain trailing below like some sooty veil, heralded another of the sudden storms common to this part of the coast in early summer. To the south, the high bluffs of Sailor's Grief reared up against the sky, as waves crashed against the base of that rocky pinnacle. White caps started to form behind the breakers, a sure sign the storm would quickly strike. Pug knew he was in danger, for the storms of summer could drown anyone on the beaches, or, if severe enough, on the low ground beyond. He picked up his sack and started north towards the castle. As he moved among the pools, he felt the coolness in the wind turn a deeper, wetter cold. The day began to be broken by a patchwork of shadows as the first clouds passed before the sun, bright colours fading to shades of grey. Out to sea, lightning flashed against the blackness of the clouds, and the distant boom of thunder rode over the noise of the waves. Pug picked up speed when he came to the first stretch of open beach. The storm was coming in faster than he would have thought possible, driving the rising tide before it. By the time he reached the second stretch of tide pools, there was barely 10 feet of dry sand between water's edge and cliffs. Pug hurried as fast as was safe across the rocks, twice nearly catching his foot. As he reached the next expanse of sand, he mistimed his jump from the last rock and landed poorly. He fell to the sand, grasping his ankle. As if waiting for the mishap, the tide surged forward, covering him for a moment. He reached out blindly and felt his sack carried away. Frantically grabbing at it, Pug lunged forward only to have his ankle fail. He went under, gulping water. He raised his head, sputtering and coughing. He started to stand when a second wave, higher than the last, hit him in the chest, knocking him backward. Pug had grown up playing in the waves and was an experienced swimmer, but the pain of his ankle and the battering of the waves were bringing him to the edge of panic. He fought it off and came up for air as the wave receded. He half swam, half scrambled toward the cliff face, knowing the water would be only inches deep there. Pug reached the cliffs and leaned against them, keeping as much weight off the injured ankle as possible. He inched along the rock wall, while each wave brought the water higher. When Pug finally reached a place where he could make his way upward, water was swirling at his waist. He had to use all his strength to pull himself up to the path. He lay panting a moment, then started to crawl up the pathway, unwilling to trust his balky ankle on this rocky footing. The first drops of rain began to fall as he scrambled along, bruising knees and shins on the rocks, until he reached the grassy top of the bluffs. Pug fell forward, exhausted, panting from the exertion of the climb. The scattered drops grew into a light but steady rain. When he had caught his breath, Pug sat up and examined the swollen ankle. It was tender to the touch, but he was reassured when he could move it. It was not broken. He would have to limp the entire way back, but, with the threat of drowning on the beach behind him, he felt relatively buoyant. Pug would be a drenched, chilled wretch when he reached the town. He would have to find a lodging there, for the gates of the castle would be closed for the night, and with his tender ankle he would not attempt to climb the wall behind the stables. Besides, should he wait and slip into the keep the next day, only Megga would have words for him. But if he was caught coming over the wall, Swordmaster Fannon or Horsemaster Algon would surely have a lot worse in store for him than words. While he rested, the rain took on an insistent quality, and the sky darkened as the late afternoon sun was completely engulfed in storm clouds. His momentary relief was replaced with anger at himself for losing the sack of sand crawlers. His displeasure doubled when he considered his folly at falling asleep. Had he remained awake, he would have made the return trip unhurriedly, would not have sprained his ankle, and would have had time to explore the stream bed above the bluffs for the smooth stones he prized so dearly for slinging. Now there would be no stones, and it would be at least another week before he could return. If Megga didn't send another boy instead, which was likely, now that he was returning empty-handed. Pug's attention shifted to the discomfort of sitting in the rain, and he decided it was time to move on. He stood and tested his ankle. It protested such treatment, but he could get along on it. He limped over the grass to where he had left his belongings and picked up his rucksack, staff and sling. He swore an oath he had heard soldiers at the keep use when he found the rucksack ripped apart and his bread and cheese missing. Raccoons, or possibly sand lizards, he thought. He tossed the now useless sack aside and wondered at his misfortune. Taking a deep breath, he leaned on his staff as he started across the low rolling hills that divided the bluffs from the road. Stands of small trees were scattered over the landscape, and Pug regretted there wasn't more substantial shelter nearby, for there was none upon the bluffs. He would be no wetter for trudging to town than for staying under a tree. The wind picked up, and Pug felt the first cold bite against his wet back. He shivered and hurried his pace as well as he could. The small tree started to bend before the wind, and Pug felt as if a great hand were pushing at his back. Reaching the road, he turned north. He heard the eerie sound of the great forest off to the east, the wind whistling through the branches of the ancient oaks, adding to its already foreboding aspect. The dark glades of the forest were probably no more perilous than the King's Road, but remembered tales of outlaws and other less human malefactors stirred the hairs on the boy's neck. Cutting across the King's Road, Pug gained a little shelter in the gully that ran alongside it. The wind intensified, and rain stung his eyes, bringing tears to already wet cheeks. A gust caught him, and he stumbled off balance for a moment. Water was gathering in the roadside gully, and he had to step carefully to keep from losing his footing in unexpectedly deep puddles. For nearly an hour he made his way through the ever-growing storm. The road turned northwest, bringing him almost full face into the howling wind. Pug leaned into the wind, his shirt whipping out behind him. He swallowed hard to force down the choking panic rising within him. He knew he was in danger now, for the storm was gaining in fury far beyond normal for this time of year. Great ragged bolts of lightning lit the dark landscape, briefly outlining the trees and road in harsh, brilliant white and opaque black. The dazzling after-images, black and white reversed, stayed with him for a moment each time, confusing his senses. Enormous thunder peals sounding overhead felt like physical blows. Now, his fear of the storm outweighed his fear of imagined brigands and goblins. He decided to walk among the trees near the road. The wind would be lessened somewhat by the boles of the oaks. As Pug closed upon the forest, a crashing sound brought him to a halt. In the gloom of the storm, he could barely make out the form of a black forest boar as it burst out of the undergrowth. The pig tumbled from the brush, lost its footing, then scrambled to its feet a few yards away. Pug could see it clearly as it stood there regarding him, swinging its head from side to side. Two large tusks seemed to glow in the dim light as they dripped rainwater. Fear made its eyes wide, and it pawed at the ground. The forest pigs were bad-tempered at best, but normally avoided humans. This one was panic-stricken by the storm, and Pug knew if it charged, he could be badly gored, even killed. Standing stock still, Pug made ready to swing his staff, but hoped the pig would return to the woods. The boar's head raised, testing the boy's smell on the wind. Its pink eyes seemed to glow as it trembled with indecision. A sound made it turn towards the trees for a moment, then it dropped its head and charged. Pug swung his staff, bringing it down in a glancing blow to the side of the pig's head, turning it. The pig slid sideways in the muddy footing, hitting Pug in the legs. He went down as the pig slipped past. Lying on the ground, Pug saw the boar skitter about as it turned to charge again. Suddenly, the pig was upon him, and Pug had no time to stand. He thrust the staff before him in a vain attempt to turn the animal again. The boar dodged the staff, and Pug tried to roll away, but a weight fell across his body. Pug covered his face with his hands, keeping his arms close to his chest, expecting to be gored. After a moment, he realized the pig was still. Uncovering his face, he discovered the pig lying across his lower legs, a black-feathered cloth-yard arrow protruding from its side. Pug looked toward the forest. A man garbed in brown leather was standing near the edge of the trees, quickly wrapping a yeoman's longbow with an oilcloth cover. Once the valuable weapon was protected from further abuse by the weather, the man crossed to stand over the boy and the beast. He was cloaked and hooded, his face hidden. He knelt next to Pug and shouted over the sound of the wind, "Are you right, boy?" as he lifted the dead boar easily from Pug's legs. "Bones broken?" "I don't think so," Pug yelled back, taking account of himself. His right side smarted, and his legs felt equally bruised. With his ankles still tender, he was feeling ill-used today, but nothing seemed broken or permanently damaged. Large, meaty hands lifted him to his feet. "Here," the man commanded, handing him his staff and the bow. Pug took them, while the stranger quickly gutted the boar with a large hunter's knife. He completed his work and turned to Pug. "Come with me, boy. You had best lodge with my master and me. It's not far, but we best hurry. This storm will get worse afore it's over. Can you walk?" Taking an unsteady step, Pug nodded. Without a word, the man shouldered the pig and took his bow. "Come," he said, as he turned toward the forest. He set off at a brisk pace, which Pug had to scramble to match. The forest cut the fury of the storm so little that conversation was impossible. A lightning flash lit the scene for a moment, and Pug caught a glimpse of the man's face. Pug tried to remember if he had seen the stranger before. He had the look common to the hunters and foresters that lived in the forest of Criddy, large-shouldered, tall, and solidly built. He had dark hair and beard, and the raw, weather-beaten appearance of one who spends most of his time outdoors. For a few fanciful moments, the boy wondered if he might be some member of an outlaw band hiding in the heart of the forest. He gave up the notion, for no outlaw would trouble himself with an obviously penniless keep boy. Remembering the man had mentioned having a master, Pug suspected he was a franklin, one who lived on the estate of a landholder. He would be in the holder's service, but not bound to him as a bondsman. The franklins were free-born, giving a share of crop or herd in exchange for the use of land. He must be freeborn. No bondsman would be allowed to carry a longbow, for they were much too valuable and dangerous. Still, Pug couldn't remember any landholdings in the forest. It was a mystery to the boy, but the toll of the day's abuses was quickly driving away any curiosity. After what seemed to be hours, the man walked into a thicket of trees. Pug nearly lost him in the darkness, for the sun had set some time before, taking with it what faint light the storm had allowed. He followed the man more from the sound of his footfalls and an awareness of his presence than from sight. Pug sensed he was on a path through the trees, for his footsteps met no resisting brush or detritus. From where they had been moments before, the path would be difficult to find in the daylight, impossible at night, unless it was already known. Soon they entered a clearing, in the midst of which sat a small stone cottage. Light shone through a single window, and smoke rose from the chimney. They crossed the clearing, and Pug wondered at the storm's relative mildness in this one spot in the forest. Once before the door, the man stood to one side and said, "You go in, boy. I must dress the pig." Nodding dumbly, Pug pushed open the wooden door and stepped in.
"Close that door, boy. You'll give me a chill and cause me my death."
Pug jumped to obey, slamming the door harder than he intended. He turned, taking in the scene before him. The interior of the cottage was a small single room. Against one wall was the fireplace, with a good-sized hearth before it. A bright, cheery fire burned, casting a warm glow. Next to the fireplace a table sat, behind which a heavy-set, yellow-robed figure rested on a bench. His grey hair and beard nearly covered his entire head, except for a pair of vivid blue eyes that twinkled in the firelight. A long pipe emerged from the beard, producing heroic clouds of pale smoke. Pug knew the man. "Master Colgan," he began, for the man was the Duke's magician and adviser, a familiar face around the castle keep. Colgan levelled a gaze at Pug, then said in a deep voice, given to rich rolling sounds and powerful tones,
"So, you know me then?"
"Yes, sir, from the castle."
"What is your name, boy from the keep?"
"Pug, Master Colgan."
"Now I remember you."
The magician absently waved his hand.
"Do not call me master, Pug, though I am rightly called master of my arts," he said, with a merry crinkling around his eyes. "I am higher born than you, it's true, but not by much. Come, there's a blanket hanging by the fire, and you are drenched. Hang your clothes to dry, then sit there."
He pointed to a bench opposite him. Pug did as he was bid, keeping an eye on the magician the entire time. He was a member of the Duke's court, but still a magician, an object of suspicion, generally held in low esteem by the common folk. If a farmer had a cow carve a monster, or blight strike the crops, villagers were apt to ascribe it to the work of some magician lurking in nearby shadows. In times not too far past, they would have stoned Colgan from Criddy as like as not. His position with the Duke earned him the tolerance of the townsfolk now, but old fears died slowly. After his garments were hung, Pug sat down. He started when he saw a pair of red eyes regarding him from just beyond the magician's table. A scaled head rose up above the tabletop and studied the boy. Colgan laughed at the boy's discomfort.
"Come, boy, Fantas will not eat you."
He dropped his hand to the head of the creature who sat next to him on his bench and rubbed above its eye ridges. It closed its eyes and gave forth a soft crooning sound, not unlike the purring of a cat. Pug shut his mouth, which had popped open with surprise, then asked, "Is he truly a dragon, sir?" The magician laughed, a rich, good-natured sound.
"Betimes he thinks he is, boy. Phantus is a fire drake, cousin to the dragon, though of smaller stature.
The creature opened one eye and fastened it on the magician.
But of equal heart,
Culgan quickly added, and the drake closed his eye again. Culgan spoke softly, in conspiratorial tones.
He is very clever, so mind what you say to him. He's a creature of finely fashioned sensibilities.
Pug nodded that he would. Can he breathe fire? He asked, eyes wide with wonder. To any boy of 13, even a cousin to a dragon was worthy of awe.
When the mood suits him, he can belch out a flame or two, though he seems rarely in the mood. I think it's due to the rich diet I supply him with, boy. He has not had to hunt for years, so he is something out of practice in the ways of drakes. In truth, I spoil him shamelessly.
Pug found the notion somehow reassuring. If the magician cared enough to spoil this creature, no matter how outlandish, then he seemed somehow more human, less mysterious. Pug studied Phantus, admiring how the fire brought golden highlights to his emerald scales. About the size of a small hound, the drake possessed a long, sinuous neck, atop which rested an alligator-like head. His wings were folded across his back, and 2 clawed feet extended before him, aimlessly pawing the air, while Culgan scratched behind bony eye ridges. His long tail swung back and forth, inches above the floor. The door opened, and the big bowman entered, holding a dressed and spitted loin of pork before him. Without a word, he crossed to the fireplace and set the meat to cook. Phantus raised his head, using his long neck to good advantage to peek over the table. With a flick of his forked tongue, the drake jumped down and in stately fashion ambled over to the hearth. He selected a warm spot before the fire and curled up to doze away the wait before dinner. The Franklin unfastened his coat and hung it on a peg by the door.
Storm will pass afore dawn, I'm thinking.
He returned to the fire and prepared a basting of wine and herbs for the pig. Pug was startled to see a large scar that ran down the left side of the man's face, showing red and angry in the firelight. Culgan waved his pipe in the Franklin's direction.
Knowing my tight-lipped man here, you'll not have made his proper acquaintance.
Meacham,
this boy is Pug, from the keep at Castle Criddy.
Meacham gave a brief nod, then returned to tending the roasting loin. Pug nodded back, though a bit late for Meacham to notice. I never thought to thank you for saving me from the boar. Meacham replied,
There's no need for thanks, boy. Had I not startled the beast, it's unlikely it would have charged you.
He left the hearth and crossed over to another part of the room, took some brown dough from a cloth-covered bucket and started kneading. Well, sir, said Pug to Culgan, it was his arrow that killed the pig. It was indeed fortunate that he was following the animal. Culgan laughed.
The poor creature who is our most welcome guest for dinner happened to be as much a victim of circumstance as yourself.
Pug looked perplexed. I don't follow, sir. Culgan stood and took down an object from the topmost shelf of his bookcase and placed it on the table before the boy. It was wrapped in a cover of dark blue velvet, so Pug knew at once that it must be a prize of great value for such an expensive material to be used for covering. Culgan removed the velvet, revealing an orb of crystal that gleamed in the firelight. Pug gave an ah of pleasure at the beauty of it, for it was without apparent flaw and splendid in its simplicity of form. Culgan pointed to the sphere of glass.
This device was fashioned as a gift by Alphafane of Kars, a most puissant artificer of magic, who thought me worthy of such a present, as I have done him a favour or two in the past, but that is of little matter. Having just this day returned from the company of Master Alphafane, I was testing his token. Look deep into the orb, Pug.
Pug fixed his eyes on the ball and tried to follow the flicker of firelight that seemed to play deep within its structure. The reflections of the room multiplied 100-fold, merged and danced as his eyes tried to fasten upon each aspect within the orb. They flowed and blended, then grew cloudy and obscure. A soft white glow at the centre of the ball replaced the red of firelight, and Pug felt his gaze become trapped by its pleasing warmth. Like the warmth of the kitchen at the keep, he thought absently. Suddenly, the milky white within the ball vanished, and Pug could see an image of the kitchen before his eyes. Fat Alfan, the cook, was making pastries, licking the sweet crumbs from his fingers. This brought the wrath of Megar, the head cook, down upon his head, for Megar considered it a disgusting habit. Pug laughed at the scene, one he had witnessed before many times, and it vanished. Suddenly, he felt tired. Calgan wrapped the orb in the cloth and put it away. "You did well, boy," he said thoughtfully. He stood watching the boy for a moment, as if considering something, then sat down.
"I would not have suspected you of being able to fashion such a clear image in one try. But you seem to be more than you first appear to be."
"Sir?"
"Never mind, Pug."
He paused for a moment, then said,
"I was using that toy for the first time, judging how far I could send my sight, when I spied you making for the road. From your limp and bruised condition, I judged that you would never reach the town. So I sent Meacham to fetch you."
Pug looked embarrassed by the unusual attention, colour rising to his cheeks. He said, with a 13-year-old's high estimation of his own ability, "You needn't have done that, sir. I would have reached the town in due time." Calgan smiled.
"Perhaps. But then again, perhaps not. The storm is unseasonably severe and perilous for travelling."
Pug listened to the soft tattoo of rain on the roof of the cottage. The storm seemed to have slackened, and Pug doubted the magician's words. As if reading the boy's thoughts, Calgan said,
"Doubt me not, Pug. This glade is protected by more than the great boles. Should you pass beyond the circle of oaks that marks the edge of my holding, you would feel the storm's fury. Meacham, how do you gauge this wind?"
Meacham put down the bread dough he was kneading and thought for a moment.
"Near as bad a storm that beat 6 ships 3 years back."
He paused for a moment, as if reconsidering the estimate, then nodded his endorsement.
"Yes, nearly as bad, though it won't blow so long."
Pug thought back 3 years to the storm that had blown a Quegan trading fleet bound for Criddy onto the rocks of Sailor's Grief. At its height, the guards on the castle walls were forced to stay in the towers, lest they be blown down. If this storm was that severe, then Calgan's magic was impressive, for outside the cottage it sounded no worse than a spring rain. Calgan sat back on the bench, occupied with trying to light his extinguished pipe. As he produced a large cloud of sweet white smoke, Pug's attention wandered to a case of books standing behind the magician. His lips moved silently as he tried to discern what was written on the bindings, but could not. Calgan lifted an eyebrow and said,
"So you can read, aye?"
Pug started, alarmed that he might have offended the magician by intruding on his domain. Calgan, sensing his embarrassment, said,
"It's all right, boy. It is no crime to know letters."
Pug felt his discomfort diminish. "I can read a little, sir. Megar the cook has shown me how to read the tallies on the stores laid away for the kitchen in the cellars. I know some numbers as well."
"Numbers too?" the magician exclaimed good-naturedly. "Well, you are something of a rare bird."
He reached behind himself and pulled out one volume bound in red-brown leather from the shelf. He opened it, squinting at one page, then another, and at last found a page that seemed to meet his requirements. He turned the open book around and lay it upon the table before Pug. Kulgan pointed to a page illuminated by a magnificent design of snakes, flowers, and twining vines in a colourful design around a large letter in the upper left corner.
"Read this, boy."
Pug had never seen anything remotely like it. His lessons had been on plain parchment, with letters fashioned in Megar's blunt script using a charcoal stick. He sat, fascinated by the details of the work, then realised the magician was staring at him. Regaining his wits, he began to read. And then there came a summons from... He looked at the word, stumbling over the complex combinations that were new to him. Zakara. He paused, looking at Kulgan to see if he was correct. The magician nodded for him to continue. For the north was to be forgotten, lest the heart of the empire languish and all be lost. And though of Bosania from birth, those soldiers still were loyal to great Kesh in their service. So for her great need, they took up their arms and put on their armour and quit Bosania, taking ship to the south to save all from destruction. Kulgan said, "That's enough," and gently closed the cover of the book.
"You are well gifted with letters for a keep, boy."
"This book, sir, what is it?" asked Pug, as Kulgan took it from him. "I've never seen anything like it." Kulgan looked at Pug for a moment, with a gaze that made him uncomfortable again, then smiled, breaking the tension. As he put the book back, he said,
"It is a history of this land, boy. It was given as a gift by the abbot of a Nishapian monastery. It's a translation of a Keshian text, over 100 years old."
Pug nodded and said, "It all sounded very strange. What does it tell of?" Kulgan once more looked at Pug, as if trying to see something inside of the boy, then said,
"A long time ago, Pug, all these lands, from the endless sea across the Grey Tower Mountains to the Bitter Sea, were part of the empire of Great Kesh. Far to the east existed a small kingdom on one small island called Rillanon. It grew to engulf its neighbouring island kingdoms, and it became the Kingdom of the Isles. Later it expanded again to the mainland, and while it is still the Kingdom of the Isles, most of us simply call it the Kingdom. We who live in Criddy are part of the Kingdom, though we live as far from the capital city of Rillanon as one can, and still be within its boundaries. Once, many long years ago, the Empire of Great Kesh abandoned these lands, for it was engaged in a long and bloody conflict with its neighbours to the south, the Keshian Confederacy.
Pug was caught up in the grandeur of lost empires, but hungry enough to notice Meacham was putting several small loaves of dark bread in the hearth oven. He turned his attention back to the magician. "Who were the Keshian
The Keshian Confederacy," Kulgan finished for the boy. "It is a group of small nations who had existed as tributaries to Great Kesh for centuries. A dozen years before that book was written, they united against their oppressor. Each alone was insufficient to contest with Great Kesh, but united they proved its match. Too close a match, for the war dragged on year after year. The Empire was forced to strip its northern provinces of their legions and send them south, leaving the north open to the advances of the new, younger kingdom. It was Duke Boric's grandfather, youngest son of the king, who brought the army westward, extending the western realm. Since then, all of what was once the old imperial province of Bosania, except for the free cities of Natal, has been called the Duchy of Criddy."
Pug thought for a moment, then said, "I think I would like to travel to this Great Kesh some day." Meacham snorted something close to a laugh.
And what would you be travelling as? A freebooter?
Pug felt his face flush. Freebooters were landless men, mercenaries who fought for pay, and who were regarded as being only one cut above outlaws. Culgan said,
Perhaps you might some day, Pug. The way is long and full of peril, but it's not unheard of for a brave and hearty soul to survive the journey. Stranger things have been known to happen.
The talk at the table turned to more common topics, for the magician had been at the Southern Keep at Cast for over a month and wanted the gossip of Criddy. When the bread was done baking, Meacham served it hot, carved the pork loin, and brought out plates of cheese and greens. Pug had never eaten so well in all his life. Even when he had worked in the kitchen, his position as keep boy earned him only meagre fare. Twice, during dinner, Pug found the magician regarding him intently. When the meal was over, Meacham cleared the table, then began washing the dishes with clean sand and fresh water, while Culgan and Pug sat talking. A single scrap of meat remained on the table, which Culgan tossed over to Fantus, who lay before the fire. The drake opened one eye to regard the morsel. He pondered the choice between his comfortable resting place and the juicy scrap for a moment, then moved the necessary 6 inches to gulp down the prize, and closed his eye again. Culgan lit his pipe, and once he was satisfied with its production of smoke, he said,
What are your plans when you reach manhood, boy?
Pug was fighting off sleep, but Culgan's question brought him alert again. The time of choosing, when the boys of the town and keep were taken into apprenticeship, was close, and Pug became excited as he said, This Midsummer's Day, I hope to take the Duke's service under Swordmaster Fannon. Culgan regarded his slight guest.
I would have thought you still a year or 2 away from apprenticeship, Pug.
Meacham gave out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a grunt.
Bit small to be lugging around sword and shield, aren't you, boy?
Pug flushed. He was the smallest boy of his age in the castle. Megga, the cook, said I may be late coming to my growth, he said, with a faint note of defiance. No one knows who my parents were, so they have no notion of what to expect.
Orphan, is it?
Asked Meacham, raising one eyebrow, his most expressive gesture yet. Pug nodded. I was left with the priests of Darla in the Mountain Abbey by a woman who claims she found me in the road. They brought me to the keep, for they had no way to care for me.
Yes, injected Culgan. I remember when those who worshipped the shield of the weak first brought you to the castle. You were no more than a baby fresh from the teat. It is only through the Duke's kindness that you are a free man today. He felt it a lesser evil to free a bondsman's son than to bond a freeman's. Without proof, it was his right to have you declared bondsman.
Meacham said in a non-committal tone,
A good man, the Duke.
Pug had heard the story of his origin 100 times before from Magyar in the kitchen of the castle. He felt completely wrung out and could barely keep his eyes open. Culgan noticed and signalled Meacham. The tall Franklin took some blankets from a shelf and prepared a sleeping pallet. By the time he finished, Pug had fallen asleep with his head on the table. The large man's hands lifted him gently from the stool and placed him on the blankets, then covered him. Fantus opened his eyes and regarded the sleeping boy. With a wolfish yawn, he scrambled over next to Pug and snuggled in close. Pug shifted his weight in his sleep and draped one arm over the drake's neck. The fire drake gave an approving rumble deep in his throat and closed his eyes again. Chapter 2. Apprentice. The forest was quiet. The slight afternoon breeze stirred the tall oaks and cut the day's heat, while rustling the leaves only slightly. Birds who would raise a raucous chorus at sunrise and sundown were mostly quiet at this time of the morning. The faint tang of sea salt mixed with the sweet smell of flowers and pungency of decaying leaves. Pug and Thomas walked slowly along the path, with the aimless weaving steps of boys who have no particular place to go and ample time to get there. Pug shied a small rock at an imagined target, then turned to look at his companion. "You don't think your mother was mad, do you?" he asked. Thomas smiled. "Oh, she understands how things are. She's seen other boys the day of choosing, and, truthfully, we were more of hindrance than a help in the kitchen today." Pug nodded. He had spilled a precious pot of honey as he carried it to Alfan, the pastry cook. Then he had dumped an entire tray of fresh bread loaves as he took them from the oven. "I made something of a fool of myself today, Thomas." Thomas laughed. He was a tall boy with sandy hair and bright blue eyes. With his quick smile, he was well liked in the keep, in spite of a boyish tendency to find trouble. He was Pug's closest friend, more brother than friend, and for that reason Pug earned some measure of acceptance from the other boys, for they all regarded Thomas as their unofficial leader. Thomas said, "You were no more fool than I. At least you didn't forget to hang the beef sides high." Pug grinned. "Anyway, the Duke's hounds are happy." He snickered, then laughed. "She is angry, isn't she?" Thomas laughed along with his friend. "She's mad. Still, the dogs only ate a little before she shooed them off. Besides, she's mostly mad at Father. She claims the choosing's only an excuse for all the craftsmasters to sit around smoking pipes, drinking ale and swapping tales all day. She says they already know who will choose which boy." Pug said, "From what the other women say, she's not alone in that opinion." Then he grinned at Thomas. "Probably not wrong either." Thomas lost his smile. "She truly doesn't like it when he's not in the kitchen to oversee things. I think she knows this, which is why she tossed us out of the keep for the morning, so she wouldn't take out her temper on us, or at least you," he added with a questioning smile. "I swear you're her favourite." Pug's grin returned, and he laughed again. "Well, I do cause less trouble." With a playful punch to the arm, Thomas said, "You mean you get caught less often?" Pug pulled his sling out from within his shirt. "If we came back with a brace of partridge or quail, she might regain some of her good temper." Thomas smiled. "She might," he agreed, taking out his own sling. Both boys were excellent slingers, Thomas being undoubted champion among the boys, edging Pug by only a little. It was unlikely either could bring down a bird on the wing, but should they find one at rest, there was a fair chance they might hit it. Besides, it would give them something to do to pass the hours, and perhaps for a time forget the choosing. With exaggerated stealth, they crept along, playing the part of hunters. Thomas led the way as they left the footpath, heading for the watering pool they knew lay not too far distant. It was improbable they would spot game this time of day, unless they simply blundered across it. But if any were to be found, it would most likely be near the pool. The woods to the northeast of the town of Criddy were less forbidding than the great forest to the south. Many years of harvesting trees for lumber had given the green glades a sunlit airiness not found in the deep haunts of the southern forest. The Keep boys had often played here over the years. With small imagination, the woods were transformed into a wondrous place, a green world of high adventure. Some of the greatest deeds known had taken place here. Daring escapes, dread quests and mightily contested battles had been witnessed by the silent trees as the boys gave vent to their youthful dreams of coming manhood. Foul creatures, mighty monsters, and base outlaws had all been fought and vanquished, often accompanied by the death of a great hero with appropriate last words to his mourning companions. All managed with just enough time left to return to the keep for supper. Thomas reached a small rise that overlooked the pool, screened off by young beech saplings, and pulled aside some brush so they could mount a vigil. He stopped, awed, and softly said, "Pug, look." Standing at the edge of the pool was a stag, head held high, as he sought the source of something that disturbed his drinking. He was an old animal, the hair around his muzzle nearly all white, and his head crowned by magnificent antlers. Pug counted quickly. "He has 14 points. Thomas nodded agreement. "He must be the oldest buck in the forest." The stag turned his attention in the boy's direction, flicking an ear nervously. They froze, not wishing to frighten off such a beautiful creature. For a long, silent minute, the stag studied the rise, nostrils flaring, then slowly lowered his head to the pool and drank. Thomas gripped Pug's shoulder and inclined his head to one side. Pug followed Thomas's motion and saw a figure walking silently into the clearing. He was a tall man dressed in leather clothing, dyed forest green. Across his back hung a longbow, and at his belt a hunter's knife. His green cloak's hood was thrown back, and he walked toward the stag with a steady, even step. Thomas said, "It's Martin." Pug also recognised the Duke's huntmaster. An orphan like Pug, Martin had come to be known as Longbow by those in the castle, as he had few equals with that weapon. Something of a mystery, Martin Longbow was still well liked by the boys, for while he was aloof with the adults in the castle, he was always friendly and accessible to the boys. As huntmaster, he was also the Duke's forester. His duties absented him from the castle for days, even weeks at a time, as he kept his trackers busy looking for signs of poaching, possible fire dangers, migrating goblins, or outlaws camping in the woods. But when he was in the castle and not organising a hunt for the Duke, he always had time for the boys. His dark eyes were always merry when they pestered him with questions of wood lore or for tales of the lands near the boundaries of Criddy. He seemed to possess unending patience, which set him apart from most of the craftmasters in the town and keep. Martin came up to the stag, gently reached out and touched his neck. The great head swung up, and the stag nuzzled Martin's arm. Softly, Martin said, "If you walk out slowly, without speaking, he might let you approach." Pug and Thomas exchanged startled glances, then stepped into the clearing. They walked slowly around the edge of the pool, the stag following their movements with his head, trembling slightly. Martin patted him reassuringly and he quieted. Thomas and Pug came to stand beside the hunter, and Martin said, "Reach out and touch him, slowly, so as not to frighten him." Thomas reached out first, and the stag trembled beneath his fingers. Pug began to reach out, and the stag retreated a step. Martin crooned to the stag in a language Pug had never heard before, and the animal stood still. Pug touched him and marvelled at the feel of his coat, so like the cured hides he had touched before, yet so different for the feel of life pulsing under his fingertips. Suddenly, the stag backed off and turned. Then, with a single bounding leap, he was gone among the trees. Martin Longbow chuckled and said, "Oh, just as well. It wouldn't do to have him become too friendly with men. Those antlers would quickly end up over some poacher's fireplace." Thomas whispered, "He's beautiful, Martin." Longbow nodded, his eyes still fastened upon the spot where the stag had vanished into the woods. "That he is, Thomas." Pug said, I thought you hunted stags, Martin. How—" Martin said, "Old Whitebeard and I have something of an understanding, Pug.